In the small town of Blue Rock, fear had a name: the Iron Reapers. For years the gang ruled through intimidation, preying on businesses, silencing voices, and keeping the community under their control. But everything changed one fateful night when Dr. Naomi Carter, a skilled physician with a background in disaster medicine, walked into Jack's Place, a late-night diner. Exhausted after a long shift, Naomi was thrust into a confrontation with the Reapers that would set the town on a path it had never dared to imagine. With her medical training and unshakable resolve, Naomi became the unlikely leader of a growing resistance. Together with a group of determined townsfolk, she inspired Blue Rock to fight back. But the Reapers didn't back down. As their attacks escalated from threats to assaults to setting fire to the community center, Naomi found herself balancing her role as healer and protector. The stakes rose with every move, forcing Naomi to confront her deepest fears and lead the town in a final stand against their oppressors. The neon sign outside Jack's Place buzzed faintly, its warm red glow cutting through the chilly night. Inside, the diner was a haven of stillness, save for the occasional clink of a coffee cup or the soft murmur of conversation. Dr. Naomi Carter sat in a corner booth, her dark hands cradling a steaming cup of chamomile tea. The exhaustion etched into her face mirrored the weight on her shoulders, a heaviness that came not just from the long shifts at Mercy General, but from the life she had once left behind. Naomi had come to this small town in search of peace. Her years as a disaster medicine specialist had taken her to the worst places imaginable: earthquake-ravaged cities, war zones, and hurricane-devastated islands. She had saved countless lives, but lost more than she cared to count. The small town of Blue Rock had seemed like a chance to start over, a place where the quiet might drown out the echoes of the past. The diner was nearly empty tonight. Jack, the gruff but kind-hearted owner, stood behind the counter polishing glasses. Lily Grant, the young waitress with a shy smile and big dreams, moved between tables, chatting softly with the regulars. A trucker named Hank Bennett, a burly man with a soft heart, sat at the counter, laughing with Jack over a story about his latest haul. Naomi sighed and took a sip of her tea. It had been a grueling week, filled with emergencies at the understaffed hospital. A teenage boy with a ruptured appendix, a woman who had gone into labor unexpectedly, and a factory worker with severe burns. Her mind wandered to the moment she had come to Blue Rock a year ago, hoping to leave the chaos behind. Yet, she often felt as though she carried the weight of the world on her back, no matter how far she traveled. The sound of motorcycles in the distance interrupted her thoughts. The low rumble grew louder, the vibration creeping into the floor beneath her feet. Naomi glanced out the window, watching as a pack of motorcycles pulled into the parking lot. A dozen riders dismounted, their black leather jackets and menacing swagger cutting through the stillness like a knife. The door swung open, and Colt Rivers stepped inside. He was tall, with a wiry frame and cold, calculating eyes. His Iron Reaper's emblem, a grinning skull surrounded by chains, gleamed on his jacket. Behind him, his crew filed in, filling the small diner with a suffocating presence. Jack's hand stilled on the glass he was cleaning. Lily froze mid-step, the coffee pot trembling slightly in her grip. Even Hank's jovial demeanor dimmed as the gang spread out, claiming territory with practiced intimidation. Naomi's pulse quickened, but she remained still, her gaze steady as she watched from her corner booth. Years of working in disaster zones had trained her to observe, to assess, to act only when necessary. Her dark eyes scanned the room, noting exits, obstacles, and the subtle tension in the air. "Well, well," Colt drawled, his voice carrying a mocking edge as he sauntered to the counter. "Looks like we found ourselves a cozy little spot tonight." The gang laughed as Colt's right-hand man, Tucker, knocked over a chair with a deliberate crash. The sound made Lily jump, and Naomi's jaw tightened at the sight of the waitress's fear. "What can I get you?" Lily asked, her voice wavering as she stepped forward. Colt leaned against the counter, his smirk predatory. Why don't you start by telling me what a pretty little thing like you is doing in a dump like this? Naomi's fingers tightened around her cup. She could feel the tension in the room, the fear radiating from the others. Jack stepped forward, his weathered face lined with concern. "Leave her alone, Colt," Jack said, his voice firm but not unkind. "You want something to eat, I'll make it. Otherwise, move along." Colt's smirk widened. "Oh, look at that. The old man thinks he can tell me what to do." Naomi set her cup down carefully. Her voice, calm and steady, cut through the rising tension. "Leave them alone." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Naomi, who remained seated, her gaze locked on Colt. Her voice carried no bravado, only quiet certainty. Colt frowned, his confidence faltering for a fraction of a second. "Well, look at this," he said, striding toward her. "Who are you, sweetheart? Another trucker passing through?" Naomi didn't flinch as Colt loomed over her. She met his gaze with the unflinching calm that had saved lives in the most desperate situations. "Dr. Naomi Carter," she said simply, "and I'm asking you to leave these people in peace." Colt chuckled, though the sound lacked true amusement. "A doctor, huh? You must think you're something special." Naomi tilted her head slightly. "No, I just think kindness isn't weakness, but maybe you're not used to hearing that." A ripple of unease passed through the gang. Colt's bravado was met with silence from his crew, and he scowled. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You don't know who you're messing with." Naomi's voice didn't waver. "And you don't know who you're intimidating." For a moment, the room felt like a taut wire ready to snap. Then Hank stood from the counter, his large frame a silent testament of support as he crossed his arms. Jack placed a hand on Lily's shoulder, gently pulling her back. The quiet defiance in their actions seemed to shift something in the air. Colt glanced around, his scowl deepening. Finally, he straightened and let out a sharp laugh. "Let's go," he barked to his crew. "This place isn't worth the trouble." The Iron Reapers filed out, their departure as loud and deliberate as their arrival. The roar of their motorcycles faded into the night, leaving a heavy silence in their wake. Naomi exhaled slowly, her muscles relaxing as the tension lifted. Jack approached her, gratitude evident in his tired smile. "Thank you," he said quietly. Naomi shook her head. "You didn't need me to stand up for you. You've got more strength than you realize." Lily, still shaken, placed a cup of coffee in front of Naomi. "That was brave," she said softly. "Thank you." Naomi accepted the coffee, her gaze lingering on Lily's trembling hands. She thought back to her time in disaster zones, to the strangers who had shown her unexpected kindness in moments of despair. One memory in particular stood out: a farmer who had shared his last loaf of bread with her team after a devastating hurricane. That small act of generosity had reminded her why she did what she did. "You're stronger than you think," Naomi said, her voice gentle but firm. "All of you are." As the diner began to return to normal, Naomi sipped her coffee, her thoughts heavy. She had come to Blue Rock to escape the chaos, to find peace. But tonight had shown her that peace wasn't something you found, it was something you created. Outside, the night was still, but Naomi knew that the storm was far from over. The cold night air bit at Naomi's face as she left Jack's place, the faint rumble of retreating motorcycles still echoing in her ears. Her feet crunched over the gravel parking lot as she made her way to her old sedan, its dark paint dulled by years of wear. She glanced over her shoulder, catching sight of Jack through the window, already back to cleaning glasses. Lily, though visibly shaken, smiled hesitantly at a joke Hank had made. Life was returning to the diner, but Naomi knew it was temporary. Sliding into her car, Naomi exhaled, gripping the steering wheel tighter than she meant to. Her calm demeanor back in the diner had been genuine, but now, alone, she let herself feel the lingering unease. The Iron Reapers weren't the kind of problem you could reason with. Colt's eyes, cold and calculating, lingered in her mind. His parting smirk, a warning that tonight's retreat was not a concession, but a delay. The drive home was quiet, the small town of Blue Rock dark and still. The streets, lined with modest homes and weathered storefronts, felt different tonight, as if the tension from the diner had seeped into the very air. Her apartment, located in a no-frills complex at the edge of town, came into view. The complex was modest 2 stories of beige siding and narrow windows, but Naomi appreciated its simplicity. It was a far cry from the cramped tents and makeshift shelters she had lived in during her time in disaster zones. Inside, Naomi flicked on the light and dropped her bag onto the small table by the door. The space was sparse but functional. A well-worn couch, a small kitchenette, and a single bookshelf lined with medical texts and a few treasured novels. Photos from her time abroad adorned the walls. They were a mix of bittersweet and proud memories, a snapshot of her team in Haiti, grinning despite their exhaustion. A small boy in Syria, his smile wide as she handed him a lollipop, and a tattered group photo taken during her last deployment, the faces of her colleagues etched with camaraderie and weariness. Naomi sank onto the couch and let her head fall back. Her body ached from the day's work, and her mind churned with the events at the diner. She had faced down worse threats before, she reminded herself. Hurricanes, floods, bombings. Yet there was something uniquely unsettling about the Iron Reapers. They weren't faceless disasters or distant enemies. They were here, in the heart of her town, preying on its people. Her phone buzzed on the table. She reached for it, expecting a work notification or an update from the hospital, but her brow furrowed when she saw Jack's name. "Naomi," Jack said, his voice low but urgent. "I hate to bother you, but I thought you should know. Colt came back after you left. He didn't come inside, just sat on his bike in the parking lot, watching." Naomi straightened, the tension in her shoulders returning. "Did he say anything?" "No," Jack replied, "but it felt like he was sending a message. Wanted us to know he's not done." Naomi thanked him and ended the call, her mind already racing. Colt was testing her, trying to assert dominance in a way she recognized all too well. Fear was his currency, and he was banking on the idea that it would be enough to make her back down. But Naomi had learned long ago that fear only worked if you let it. The next morning, Naomi arrived at Mercy General early, the pale light of dawn creeping over the town. The hospital was small but busy, its worn facade a testament to the demands placed on it by the surrounding rural communities. Inside, the familiar hum of activity greeted her. Nurses hurried between stations, doctors conferred over charts, and the sharp scent of antiseptic filled the air. "Morning, Naomi," called Dr. Raj Patel, her closest colleague and one of the few people who knew about her past. His warm smile faded slightly as he took in her expression. "Rough night?" "You could say that," Naomi replied, pulling on her white coat. "Ran into some trouble at Jack's place." Dr. Patel raised an eyebrow but didn't press. He knew Naomi well enough to recognize when she wasn't ready to talk. Instead, he handed her a chart. "Got a new admit in room 4. Factory accident. Worker crushed his hand in a press." Naomi nodded, letting the routine of work ground her. She spent the morning stitching wounds, setting bones, and consulting on diagnoses. Yet, in the quieter moments, her mind drifted back to Colt and the Iron Reapers. She couldn't ignore the unease growing in the pit of her stomach. She'd seen how unchecked power could devastate communities, and she wouldn't let it happen here. By midday, Naomi decided to stop by the diner during her lunch break. Jack greeted her with a weary smile, but the tension in the air was palpable. Lily was quieter than usual, her hands trembling slightly as she refilled a customer's coffee. Hank sat at his usual spot, his burly presence a silent show of support. "How are you holding up?" Naomi asked Jack as she slid onto a stool at the counter. Jack sighed, running a hand over his salt and pepper hair. "People are scared, Naomi. Colt's been hanging around, making his presence known. Folks are talking about closing early, staying home. It's like a dark cloud hanging over the place. Naomi frowned. That's exactly what he wants. Fear gives him power. If we let him intimidate us into hiding, we've already lost. Jack nodded, though his expression remained troubled. Not everyone's got your backbone, though. Naomi glanced around the diner, her gaze settling on Lily. The young waitress's usual spark had dimmed, her movements stiff and uncertain. Naomi felt a pang of guilt. Her stand the previous night had drawn Colt's attention, and now others were paying the price. "Lily," Naomi said softly, catching the waitress as she passed. "Can we talk for a moment?" Lily hesitated, her eyes darting toward the door as though expecting Colt to walk in. But she nodded and followed Naomi to the corner booth. "I know last night was scary," Naomi began. "And I know Colt's presence is intimidating, but he feeds off fear. If we stand together, we can push back." Lily bit her lip, her hands twisting in her apron. "I want to believe that, but what if he hurts someone? What if it's not just talks?" Naomi reached across the table, placing a steadying hand over Lily's. "I've seen people stand up to things far worse than Colt Rivers. Hurricanes, earthquakes, war zones. And do you know what got them through? Unity. When people come together, they can withstand anything." Lily's eyes glistened, but she nodded. "Okay, what do we do?" Naomi smiled, her grip firm but gentle. "We start by refusing to let fear dictate our lives, one step at a time." That night, as Naomi left the diner, she noticed something that made her pause. Hank's truck was parked in its usual spot, but the words "Leave" had been scrawled across the windshield in bright red paint. Hank stood nearby, scrubbing furiously with a rag, his face set in grim determination. Naomi walked over and placed a hand on his arm. "Let me help." Hank stopped, looking at her with tired eyes. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" "Maybe," Naomi admitted, "but we'll face it together." For the first time that day, Hank smiled, small but genuine. "You're something else, Doc. Thanks." As they worked together to clean the truck, Naomi felt a flicker of hope. Fear was powerful, but kindness was stronger. One act at a time, they could fight back. And Naomi, who had spent her life helping others in their darkest moments, knew that this was just the beginning. The next morning, Naomi stood in her small kitchen, sipping a mug of black coffee as sunlight streamed through the window. The tension of the last 2 days lingered like an ache in her chest, but the quiet resolve she felt was stronger. Last night, as she had scrubbed the hateful message off Hank's truck, she had sensed something shifting not just in herself, but in the people around her. Fear still loomed, but so did the possibility of resistance. A sharp knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Setting the mug down, she crossed the room and opened the door to find Lily standing there, her face pale and eyes wide. In her hands was a paper bag that she clutched tightly, as though it were an anchor. "Dr. Carter," Lily said, her voice trembling, "can I come in?" Naomi stepped aside without hesitation. "Of course. What's wrong?" Lily entered, looking around the small apartment as if to ground herself before sitting at the edge of the couch. Naomi sat beside her, waiting patiently for the young woman to speak. After a moment of silence, Lily opened the bag and pulled out a battered notebook. The edges were frayed, and the cover was stained from years of use. "They followed me home last night," Lily said quietly, her voice shaking. "Not Colt, but a few of his guys. They just watched from the street. Didn't say anything, but I knew what they were doing." Naomi's hands tightened into fists, but her voice remained calm. "Are you safe now?" Lily nodded. "For now, but they're trying to scare me, trying to make me quit the diner." She opened the notebook and pushed it toward Naomi. Inside were pages filled with careful notes, names, and dates. "This is what they've been doing," Lily explained. "Every time someone speaks out, they show up. Vandalize something, break a window, leave a message. I've been keeping track." Naomi flipped through the notebook, her brow furrowing as she read. It wasn't just Lily, there were notes about other incidents across the town. A shopkeeper whose windows were smashed after refusing to pay the Reaper's so-called protection fee. A local mechanic whose tools were stolen after reporting them to the police. The gang's intimidation was a coordinated effort, and it wasn't new. "This is important," Naomi said, her voice steady. "This kind of documentation can help build a case against them. Have you shown this to anyone else?" Lily shook her head. "I didn't think anyone would care. Most people just put up with it." Naomi closed the notebook and placed a reassuring hand on Lily's. "Not anymore. You've done something brave here, Lily. This could help a lot of people." For the first time that morning, Lily's shoulders relaxed slightly. "What do we do now?" Naomi's mind raced. "We start by letting people know they're not alone, and we get this notebook into the right hands." Later that day, Naomi returned to Jack's place with Lily. The diner was quieter than usual, the few patrons inside casting wary glances at the windows as though expecting trouble. Jack greeted them with a nod, his smile tired but genuine. "Dr. Carter," he said, "didn't expect to see you again so soon." Naomi slid onto a stool at the counter, her presence drawing the attention of the room. Lily sat beside her, clutching the notebook in her lap. "Jack," Naomi began, her voice calm but firm, "we need to talk." As Jack leaned in, Naomi explained what Lily had shared with her. The older man's face grew graver with each passing word, his jaw tightening when he saw the notebook. "I had no idea it was this bad," he muttered, flipping through the pages. "It's worse than people realize," Naomi said, "but it's not hopeless. The first step is showing people they're not alone. If we stand together, they'll see they can't intimidate everyone." Jack glanced at the handful of customers in the diner. "Easier said than done, Doc. People around here are good folks, but they've been scared for a long time." Naomi nodded. "Fear works because it isolates people. If we can break that isolation, get people talking, supporting each other, it'll start to unravel." Jack considered her words, then gave a small nod. "I'll back you up. What do you need?" "Start with the people you trust most," Naomi said. "Spread the word. Let them know we're not giving in." Over the next few days, word of Naomi's quiet defiance began to spread. At the hospital, patients and staff whispered about the doctor who had stood up to the Iron Reapers. Jack spoke with other business owners, sharing Lily's notebook and encouraging them to share their own experiences. Hank, always willing to lend a hand, began organizing informal patrols to keep an eye on the town's most vulnerable spots. Small acts of resistance began to ripple through Blue Rock. The mechanic whose tools had been stolen repaired the locks on his shop and refused to pay the gang's fees. The shopkeeper whose windows had been smashed installed a security camera and reached out to the police. At first, these actions were met with retaliation, broken locks, more vandalism, but as more people joined in, the gang's resources were stretched thin. Naomi continued her work at the hospital, but the tension in the town weighed on her. She knew the Iron Reapers wouldn't back down without a fight. Every time she drove home, she checked her rearview mirror, her instincts from disaster zones keeping her hyper-aware. And yet, she also saw glimmers of hope. Lily, once hesitant and nervous, had grown more confident, even helping Jack organize a meeting for local business owners. The quiet acts of defiance were adding up. One evening, as Naomi finished her shift, she found herself reluctant to return to her empty apartment. Instead, she drove to Jack's place, the diner now a second home for her. When she stepped inside, the usual chatter paused for a moment before resuming. The townsfolk had come to see Naomi as more than a doctor. She was becoming a symbol of quiet strength. Jack greeted her with a cup of coffee and a small smile. "You're becoming a regular." "Guess I've found my spot," Naomi replied, sitting at the counter. As she sipped her coffee, Hank entered the diner, his face lit with urgency. "Doc, you need to see this." He led her outside, where his truck was parked in the lot. Naomi's breath caught as she saw the back of the truck. Spray-painted in bold red letters was a message: "Leave town." Naomi's heart sank, but she forced herself to remain calm. Hank's fists were clenched at his sides, his jaw tight. "They're targeting anyone who stands with you." Naomi reached out and placed a hand on his arm. "That means they're scared, Hank. They wouldn't do this if they weren't." Hank's tension eased slightly at her words, but the anger in his eyes didn't fade. "What do we do?" "We keep going," Naomi said firmly. "We don't let them win." Back inside the diner, Naomi called Lily and Jack to the counter. Together, they discussed the next steps. "We need to be smarter than them," Naomi said. "If we stay united, they'll see they can't break us." As the group spoke, a moment of unexpected kindness unfolded. One of the diner's quieter patrons, an elderly woman named Mrs. Harris, approached Naomi. She had lived in Blue Rock for decades and rarely spoke out, but tonight she placed a hand on Naomi's shoulder. "My husband always said a strong heart can carry a whole town," Mrs. Harris said. "He'd be proud of what you're doing." "We all are." Naomi was momentarily speechless. The words, simple yet profound, struck a chord deep within her. They reminded her of the reason she had come to Blue Rock, not just to escape, but to build something better. "Thank you," Naomi said softly. "But this is all of us. We stand together." As Mrs. Harris returned to her seat, Naomi felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight ahead wouldn't be easy, but the ripples of resistance were growing stronger. Together, they were starting to turn the tide. Naomi's footsteps echoed softly as she walked through the hospital corridors the next morning, her mind still replaying the spray-painted threat on Hank's truck. The message wasn't just a warning, it was a declaration of war. Yet, the diner had shown her something last night. The people of Blue Rock weren't as broken as they seemed. They were bruised, yes, but underneath the fear was a spark waiting to ignite. The hospital buzzed with its usual controlled chaos. Naomi greeted nurses and patients as she moved through the emergency room, her steady presence bringing comfort to those around her. The work demanded her focus, which she welcomed. Stitching wounds and stabilizing patients felt like a reprieve from the mental strain of facing the Iron Reapers. By mid-morning, Naomi paused to review patient charts at the nurse's station. Lily's notebook weighed heavy in her bag, a constant reminder of the escalating stakes. Dr. Patel joined her, his expression tinged with curiosity. "You've been distracted," he said, leaning against the counter. "And I know you well enough to know it's not just the workload." Naomi glanced at him, considering her words carefully. "Do you ever feel like some battles follow you, no matter where you go?" Dr. Patel studied her for a moment before nodding. "You can leave the battlefield, but the battlefield doesn't always leave you. What's going on?" Naomi hesitated, but the memory of Mrs. Harris's words from the night before gave her courage. "There's trouble in town," she said, her voice low. "A gang that's been running unchecked for years. People are scared, but they're starting to push back." Dr. Patel raised an eyebrow. "And you're in the middle of it." "They followed Lily home," Naomi said, her tone sharp with anger. "They vandalized Hank's truck. It's escalating, and if we don't take a stand, they'll keep doing this to everyone." Dr. Patel's thoughtful expression deepened. "You're taking on more than just their injuries now, aren't you?" Naomi nodded. "I can't just patch people up and send them back into the same broken system. Not anymore." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've always been the kind of person who doesn't just treat wounds, you fix what caused them. If anyone can do this, it's you. Just don't forget to take care of yourself in the process." That evening, Naomi returned to the diner to find it unusually busy. Jack, moving behind the counter with practiced efficiency, looked up as she entered and nodded toward the back. Curious, Naomi made her way to the far corner, where a group of locals sat in a tight circle. Lily was there, alongside Hank, Mrs. Harris, and several others Naomi recognized as shopkeepers and residents who had quietly endured the Reaper's reign. The tension was palpable, but so was something else, a glimmer of resolve. "Dr. Carter," Jack called from behind the counter, "I think this meeting for you." Naomi took a seat, her gaze sweeping over the group. "What's going on?" Hank leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "We've been talking," he said, "about what you said last night, about standing together. We're tired of being afraid," Lily added, her voice trembling but determined. "If we don't fight back now, we never will." Mrs. Harris nodded. "It's time someone showed them they can't run this town." Naomi's heart swelled with a mix of pride and caution. These people were putting their faith in her, but the stakes were high. The Reapers wouldn't back down without a fight, and she had to make sure they were ready. "This isn't just about standing up to them," Naomi said, her voice firm. "It's about being smart, organized. We can't let them pick us off one by one." "What do you suggest?" Jack asked, folding his arms. Naomi paused, her mind racing. "We need to start small, look out for each other. If someone's being followed, don't let them go home alone. If a business is being targeted, make sure they have support. And we need to keep documenting everything, every threat, every act of vandalism. The more evidence we have, the stronger our case." The group exchanged nods, their determination solidifying. "And what about Colt?" Hank asked. "He's not just going to stand by and let us do this." Naomi's jaw tightened. "Then we show him we're not afraid." The first test came 2 nights later. Naomi was leaving the hospital after a late shift when she noticed a shadowed figure lingering near her car. She slowed, her senses on high alert, and recognized Tucker, Colt's right-hand man, leaning casually against the hood. "Evening, Doc?" Tucker drawled, his tone oozing false charm. "You've been busy, haven't you?" Naomi stopped a few feet away, her gaze steady. "What do you want, Tucker?" "Just a friendly warning," he said, pushing off the car. "You're stirring things up. Colt doesn't like it when people stir things up." Naomi crossed her arms. "Colt doesn't scare me. And he shouldn't scare this town either." Tucker's smirk faltered, replaced by something more guarded. "You're making a mistake, Doc. This isn't your fight." "You're wrong," Naomi said evenly. "This is exactly my fight. This town is my home, and I won't let Colt tear it apart." Tucker studied her for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether to push further. Finally, he stepped back. "Your call," he said, his tone colder now. "Just remember you were warned." As Tucker disappeared into the night, Naomi's heart pounded in her chest. She knew this was only the beginning. The next day, Naomi shared the encounter with the group at Jack's place. The mood was tense but resolute. "They're testing us," she said, "but we're not backing down." Lily spoke up, her voice stronger than before. "What do we do next?" Naomi smiled faintly. "We keep building. Keep showing them that fear doesn't work here anymore." The group left the diner that night with a renewed sense of purpose. Naomi stayed behind, helping Jack clean up as the last customers trickled out. "You're doing something incredible, you know," Jack said as he wiped down the counter. Naomi shook her head. "I'm just trying to help." "Don't sell yourself short," Jack replied. "You've given people hope. That's no small thing." As Naomi drove home, she thought about Jack's words. She hadn't set out to lead a movement, but somehow that was exactly what was happening. And for the first time in a long time, she felt the faint stirrings of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. But she knew the road ahead would be hard. The Iron Reapers wouldn't give up their control easily. Still, as she parked her car and looked up at the night sky, Naomi reminded herself of one simple truth she had learned in disaster zones. Resilience wasn't about never facing hardship. It was about facing it together. And together, the people of Blue Rock were becoming a force to be reckoned with. The evening air was crisp as Naomi parked her car outside Jack's place. The diner had become the unofficial headquarters for their growing resistance. It was no longer just a place to eat, it was a symbol, a quiet declaration that fear would not define Blue Rock. Inside, the usual group had gathered, their faces lit with determination. Hank sat at the counter, flipping through Lily's notebook, while Jack poured coffee and listened intently. Mrs. Harris and a few other townsfolk filled the booths, discussing plans for organizing their neighborhoods. Naomi sat down beside Hank, her eyes scanning the group. Their quiet resolve filled her with a sense of purpose, but the unease in her chest hadn't eased. The Reapers wouldn't let their defiance go unanswered, and Naomi knew it was only a matter of time before they struck back. "Any news?" Naomi asked Hank. He grunted, tapping the notebook. "A couple of the shop owners downtown said they've seen Colt's guys hanging around. Not doing anything, just watching." "Classic intimidation," Naomi muttered. "They're trying to see how far they can push before we break." Hank's expression hardened. "We're not breaking." Before Naomi could respond, the bell above the door jingled, and Lily rushed in, her face pale. "It's happening," she gasped. "They're at Mac's auto shop right now, smashing windows, yelling. Mac called me because he didn't know who else to call." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Naomi, who stood immediately, her pulse quickening. "Let's go," she said, her voice firm. When Naomi arrived at the auto shop with Hank and Jack, the scene was already chaotic. 3 Iron Reapers stood in the parking lot, their bikes parked haphazardly, while Mac, the shop's owner, stood near the shattered remnants of his office window. The fluorescent light above the door flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows over the scene. One of the bikers, a wiry man with a scar across his cheek, was shouting, "You think you can get away with talking to the cops, Mac? You think we won't find out?" "Leave him alone," Naomi called, stepping forward. Her voice cut through the night, sharp and commanding. The biker turned, his expression twisting into a sneer. "Well, look who it is. The good doctor. You think you're some kind of hero, don't you?" "I think I'm tired of watching you terrorize this town," Naomi replied, her gaze steady. "Leave now, or we'll make sure the police know exactly who's responsible for this." The man laughed, but it was edged with uncertainty. "You're gonna stop us? With what? A stethoscope?" Hank stepped forward, his imposing frame a quiet warning. Jack stood at his side, gripping a heavy flashlight like a weapon. The other townsfolk, alerted by Lily, began arriving one by one, forming a loose circle around the bikers. Naomi's heart raced as the tension thickened, but she kept her voice calm. "You think you can scare people into silence, but all you're doing is showing everyone what cowards you really are." The scarred biker's sneer faltered, and he glanced at his companions, who looked less confident by the second. "Let's go," one of them muttered. The leader hesitated but finally spat on the ground. "This isn't over." The 3 bikers mounted their motorcycles, the roar of their engines filling the night as they sped off into the darkness. Back inside the shop, Max slumped into a chair, his hands shaking. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse. "I didn't know what to do." "You did the right thing by calling," Naomi said, kneeling beside him. "That's how we stand up to them together." Hank placed a hand on Mac's shoulder. "We'll help you clean up. And if they come back, you call again. We've got your back." Naomi nodded, her resolve strengthening as she looked around at the townsfolk who had gathered. The Reapers had tried to sow fear, but all they had done was bring people closer together. That night, Naomi returned home exhausted, but unable to sleep. She paced her small apartment, her mind replaying the confrontation at the shop. It had gone as well as she could have hoped, but it was only a matter of time before Colt escalated. Her phone buzzed on the counter, and she grabbed it, expecting a message from Lily or Jack. Instead, the number was unknown. "We saw what you did tonight. Watch your back." Naomi's stomach twisted, but she refused to let fear take hold. She deleted the message and set the phone down, breathing deeply to calm her racing heart. She thought back to her days in disaster zones, to the chaos and danger she had faced daily. Those experiences had taught her how to stay calm under pressure, how to keep moving even when the odds seemed insurmountable. This was no different, she told herself. She just needed to stay focused. The next day at the hospital, Naomi threw herself into her work. The steady rhythm of treating patients was a welcome distraction from the growing tensions in town. But by the afternoon, her resolve was tested when Mac arrived in the ER. "Mac," Naomi said, rushing to his side as he was wheeled in. His face was swollen, his lips split, and his arm hung at an unnatural angle. "They jumped me," he mumbled. "Two of them. Caught me outside my shop this morning." Naomi's jaw tightened, fury bubbling beneath her calm exterior. She turned to the nurse. "Let's get him stabilized." As they worked to treat Mac's injuries, Naomi's mind raced. The Reapers weren't just intimidating people anymore. They were sending a message. This wasn't about one shop or one person. It was about control. When Mac was finally resting, Naomi stepped outside to call Jack. "They hurt Mac," she said, her voice tight with anger. Jack swore under his breath. "What do we do now?" Naomi took a deep breath. "We don't stop. We can't let them think this will work." That evening, Naomi called another meeting at the diner. The mood was somber, but there was no mistaking the undercurrent of determination in the room. "This is what they do," Naomi said, addressing the group. "They want us to think we're alone, that we're too small to fight back. But we're not. Look around this room. Every one of you is here because you refuse to let them win." "What if they come after someone else?" Mrs. Harris asked, her voice trembling. Naomi's expression softened. "Then we'll be there for each other, every step of the way." Lily spoke up, her voice clear and strong. "I'm not afraid of them anymore. If they think they can scare us back into silence, they're wrong." The group murmured in agreement, their fear giving way to resolve. Naomi felt a spark of hope reignite. The Reapers might have landed the first blow, but the people of Blue Rock were far from defeated. Later that night, as Naomi walked to her car, she noticed a small bouquet of flowers tucked under the windshield wiper. A note was attached. "Thank you for standing up for us." Naomi smiled faintly, holding the flowers close. Kindness, she thought, was the greatest weapon against fear. The fight was far from over, but in this moment, she felt ready to face whatever came next. The bouquet of flowers sat in a glass jar on Naomi's kitchen counter, a small but meaningful reminder of the solidarity growing in Blue Rock. She had stared at the note for a long time the night before, its simple words of gratitude fueling her resolve. Yet, as morning sunlight filtered into her apartment, a new heaviness settled on her chest. The Reapers weren't backing down, they were regrouping, and their retaliation was inevitable. At the hospital, Naomi pushed through another busy shift. The staff whispered about Mac's assault, and more patients came forward with injuries tied to gang-related violence. Each story weighed on Naomi like a stone. She treated their wounds with steady hands, but couldn't shake the feeling that she was merely patching up symptoms of a deeper problem. By mid-afternoon, Naomi spotted Lily near the nurse's station, clutching her phone tightly. Her face was pale, and her wide eyes darted nervously around the room. "Lily," Naomi called softly, pulling her aside. "What's wrong?" They spray-painted my apartment door," Lily stammered, her voice trembling. "It said, 'Next time, it's more than paint.'" Naomi's stomach churned with anger, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Did you call the police?" Lily nodded. "They took a report, but they can't do much unless they catch someone in the act." Naomi placed a steadying hand on Lily's shoulder. "You're not alone in this. You've got us, and you've got the whole town behind you." Lily's lips trembled, but she nodded. "I just don't know how much more I can take." Naomi's grip tightened slightly. "You're stronger than you think, Lily. We'll get through this. Together." That evening, Jack's place buzzed with quiet tension. Word of the Reapers' latest threats had spread, and the usual gathering of townsfolk seemed larger than ever. Hank stood near the door like a sentry, his watchful gaze scanning the parking lot. Jack moved briskly between tables, his movements more clipped than usual. Naomi sat at her usual booth, her mind working overtime. The flowers and note had reminded her of the power of kindness, but she knew kindness alone wouldn't stop the Reapers. They needed a plan, something that showed Colt and his gang their tactics wouldn't work anymore. As if on cue, Jack slid into the seat across from her. "Got a minute?" "Always," Naomi said, folding her hands in front of her. Jack hesitated, his usually steady demeanor faltering. "I've been thinking about what you said before, how fear works because people feel isolated." Naomi nodded. "It's their biggest weapon." "Well," Jack continued, "what if we turn it around? Show the Reapers that we're not isolated anymore?" "What do you mean?" Jack leaned forward, his voice lowering. "A rally, right here at the diner. Bring everyone together, business owners, residents, the whole community. Make it clear that we're standing together." Naomi frowned slightly, weighing the idea. "It's risky. A public show of defiance could provoke them." "Maybe," Jack said, his gaze steady. "But I think it's worth it. People need to see they're not alone, that they've got more power than they realize." Naomi considered his words carefully. A rally would send a strong message, but it could also put everyone in danger. Yet, as she looked around the diner at the determined faces of her neighbors, she realized Jack was right. They needed to take control of the narrative, and this was their chance. Over the next few days, plans for the rally came together quickly. Flyers were posted around town, and word spread through Blue Rock like wildfire. Business owners agreed to close early that night to attend, and local families volunteered to bring food and supplies. Hank coordinated a small team to keep watch during the event, ensuring everyone's safety. Despite the growing excitement, Naomi felt a constant undercurrent of tension. The Reapers weren't the type to sit idly by while their power was challenged. They hadn't escalated further since Mac's assault, but the silence was unnerving. "Quiet doesn't mean safe," Naomi muttered to herself as she parked outside the diner the evening of the rally. The parking lot of Jack's place was already packed with cars when Naomi arrived. Strings of lights hung between poles, casting a warm glow over the gathering crowd. The murmur of conversation filled the air, punctuated by laughter and the clink of coffee cups. Naomi made her way through the throng of people, stopping to greet familiar faces. Mrs. Harris waved her over, holding a plate of cookies. "Didn't think I'd live to see a day like this," Mrs. Harris said, her voice thick with emotion. Naomi smiled faintly. "Neither did I. But this is just the beginning." The rally officially began at sunset. Jack stood on a makeshift stage, a wooden pallet draped in a cloth, addressing the crowd with his usual mix of humor and warmth. He spoke about the diner's history, about the resilience of Blue Rock's people, and about the importance of standing together. When Jack finished, he turned to Naomi, motioning for her to take the stage. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward, the crowd falling silent as she approached. "I didn't come to Blue Rock expecting to lead anything," Naomi began, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "I came here looking for peace, but peace isn't something we can just wait for. It's something we have to build." She scanned the crowd, meeting as many eyes as she could. "The Iron Reapers want us to believe we're powerless. They want us to believe that fear is stronger than community. But look around you. Look at what we've already built together. They can't take this from us unless we let them." Applause broke out, rippling through the crowd like a wave. Naomi stepped back, her heart pounding. The sense of unity in the air was palpable, and for the first time in weeks, she felt the faintest glimmer of victory. As the rally continued, Naomi wandered through the crowd, feeling a cautious sense of hope. Lily approached her, a hesitant smile on her face. "You were incredible up there," Lily said. Naomi chuckled softly. "I think Jack deserves most of the credit." "No," Lily insisted. "This is because of you. You gave us the courage to fight back." Before Naomi could respond, the unmistakable sound of motorcycles rumbled in the distance. The crowd fell silent, the hum of conversation replaced by a growing tension. Naomi's chest tightened as the Reapers' bikes came into view, their headlights cutting through the darkness. They parked at the edge of the lot, their presence a deliberate challenge. Colt dismounted first, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the gathering. The crowd parted slightly as Naomi stepped forward, her heart pounding, but her steps steady. She stopped a few feet away from Colt, her gaze unwavering. "You're not welcome here," Naomi said, her voice loud enough for the crowd to hear. Colt smirked, his eyes narrowing. "You've got guts, Doc. I'll give you that, but guts won't save you." "Neither will fear," Naomi shot back, "and that's all you've got left." The crowd shifted, their murmurs growing louder. Naomi could feel their support behind her, a silent but powerful show of unity. Colt's smirk faltered, but he recovered quickly. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and threatening. "No," Naomi replied, her tone firm. "It's just beginning." The Reapers lingered for a moment longer before retreating, their engines roaring as they sped into the night. As the crowd erupted into cheers, Naomi exhaled deeply, her hands trembling slightly. She turned to face her neighbors, their faces lit with newfound determination. The Reapers might have come to intimidate, but they had only strengthened the resolve of Blue Rock. For the first time, Naomi believed they could truly win, and that belief was enough to carry her through whatever came next. The rally ended on a triumphant note, but the tension lingered like a shadow over Blue Rock. Naomi knew the Iron Reaper's appearance wasn't an empty gesture. Colt had made it clear with his smug retreat that their defiance wouldn't go unanswered. The days following the rally were deceptively calm, and that worried Naomi more than outright aggression. "Quiet means they're planning something," she told Jack during her next visit to the diner. He nodded grimly, wiping down the counter. They didn't like being shown up in front of the whole town. Colt's pride got hit hard, and men like him don't take that lying down. Hank, seated at the far end of the counter, chimed in. "I'll keep watch tonight. Make sure they don't try anything here." Naomi appreciated Hank's vigilance, but her gut told her that whatever Colt was planning, it would be bigger than a few broken windows. He needed to make a statement to reclaim his power, and Jack's place had become the heart of the town's resistance. It was the obvious target. 3 days later, the blow finally came. Naomi was leaving the hospital after another long shift when her phone buzzed in her pocket. She frowned, pulling it out to see Jack's name on the screen. "Jack?" she answered. "They're here," Jack said, his voice tight. "Colt and his whole crew. They've surrounded the diner." Naomi's stomach dropped. "Is everyone okay?" "For now," Jack said. "But they're making threats, and I don't think they're just here to talk." "I'm on my way," Naomi said, already rushing to her car. The scene at Jack's place was worse than Naomi had imagined. At least 20 motorcycles were parked in the lot, their riders forming a loose, menacing circle around the diner. Colt stood at the center, his leather jacket gleaming under the fluorescent lights. His crew loitered nearby, their laughter and shouts a jarring contrast to the quiet tension inside the diner. Naomi parked her car at the edge of the lot and stepped out, her heart pounding. She could see Jack, Lily, and a handful of customers through the diner's windows, their faces drawn with fear. But they weren't cowering. They were watching, waiting for someone to lead them. Naomi straightened her shoulders and walked toward the diner. "Well, look who decided to join the party," Colt called, his smirk widening as he saw her. "Dr. Carter, the town's new hero." Naomi stopped a few feet away from him, her gaze steady. "You're not welcome here, Colt. Leave before this gets worse for you." Colt's crew erupted in laughter, but Naomi didn't flinch. "You think you can scare us, Doc?" Colt asked, his voice dripping with mockery. "We've been running this town long before you showed up, and we're not going anywhere." Naomi's voice was calm, but firm. "Running a town doesn't mean terrorizing its people. The only power you have is fear, and we're not afraid of you anymore." Colt's smirk faltered, but he recovered quickly. "We'll see about that." He gestured to his crew. "Boys, show them what happens when you mess with the Reapers." The gang surged forward, their movements calculated and intimidating. Naomi stepped back, her heart racing as she calculated her next move. "Wait," she called, her voice cutting through the chaos. The gang hesitated, their momentum stalled as Colt turned to glare at her. "You don't need to do this," Naomi said, addressing the group. "This doesn't make you strong, it makes you weak. Strength isn't about fear, it's about standing for something better." A few of the bikers exchanged uncertain glances, but Colt barked, "Don't listen to her. She's just a doctor. She doesn't know how the real world works." "I know more than you think," Naomi said, her voice unwavering. "I've seen what happens when people choose fear over hope. It destroys communities. It destroys lives. But it doesn't have to be that way." For a moment, the group wavered, but Colt stepped forward, his face twisted with rage. "Enough of this. You've had your fun, Doc. Now it's time to teach you a lesson." Before Colt could make his move, Hank appeared at the diner door, a baseball bat in hand. Behind him, Jack, Lily, and several customers followed, their presence a quiet show of unity. "You want to fight someone?" Hank said, his voice steady. "You'll have to go through all of us." The gang froze, their confidence shaken as they realized they were outnumbered. The crowd behind Naomi grew as more townsfolk arrived, drawn by the commotion. Within minutes, dozens of residents filled the parking lot, their collective presence forcing the Reapers to rethink their position. "This isn't over," Colt spat, his voice venomous. "You think you've won? We'll be back." Naomi took a step closer, her gaze locking with his. "You'll find us ready." With a final sneer, Colt gestured for his crew to retreat. The motorcycles roared to life, their departure loud but hollow. Inside the diner, the atmosphere was electric. The customers who had once been afraid now sat with heads held high, their fear replaced by a newfound sense of strength. Jack poured coffee for everyone, his hands steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through him. "You did good out there, Doc," Hank said, clapping Naomi on the shoulder. Naomi shook her head. "We did good. This wasn't just me." Lily approached, her eyes bright with determination. "They didn't expect us to stand up to them, but we did." Naomi smiled faintly, her chest swelling with pride. The Reapers had tried to break them, but instead, they had brought the town closer together. As the night wore on, Naomi sat at her usual booth, sipping a cup of tea as she watched the diner buzz with life. The fight wasn't over, she knew that, but tonight they had won a battle, and that was enough to keep her going. For the first time in weeks, Naomi allowed herself to believe that Blue Rock could truly be free from fear. Together, they were proving that unity was stronger than any threat, and that, she thought, was a victory worth fighting for. The next morning, the victory at Jack's place lingered in the minds of Blue Rock's residents. The confrontation had shown the Iron Reapers that the town would not cower in silence anymore. But as Naomi drove to the hospital, a knot of unease twisted in her stomach. Colt wasn't the kind of man who would take public humiliation lightly. She knew he was planning his next move. The hospital was bustling as usual, but Naomi noticed something different in the air. Patients and staff whispered about the events at the diner, some with cautious hope, others with nervous apprehension. Even Dr. Patel, typically unshakable, paused during rounds to speak with Naomi. "Word is spreading," he said, his tone both impressed and wary. "What you're doing, what the town is doing, it's inspiring. But don't underestimate how desperate they'll get if they feel cornered." Naomi nodded, her mind already running through worst-case scenarios. Desperate people make dangerous decisions. We'll have to be ready. The first sign of retaliation came that evening. Naomi had just returned home from the hospital when her phone buzzed with an urgent call from Jack. "They hit Hank," Jack said, his voice strained. Naomi's heart sank. "Where is he? Is he okay? He's at Mercy now, Jack said. Some of Colt's guys jumped him at the truck stop, took his wallet, roughed him up pretty bad. Naomi didn't waste a second. She grabbed her keys and was back in her car before Jack could say another word. Hank was sitting upright in an ER bed when Naomi arrived, his face bruised and one arm in a sling. He managed a weak smile when he saw her. "Guess I'm not as tough as I thought," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. Naomi pulled a chair beside his bed, her expression gentle but serious. "You held your ground, Hank. That's what matters." "They wanted to send a message," he muttered. "Made sure I knew this was because of what happened at the diner." Naomi's jaw tightened. "And what message did you send back?" Hank chuckled softly, wincing at the movement. "Told them they'd have to do better if they wanted to scare me off." Despite the situation, Naomi couldn't help but smile. "That's the spirit. But we're not letting this slide. The more people they hurt, the more they show their true colors." The attack on Hank rattled the town, but it also hardened their resolve. Naomi and the others redoubled their efforts, meeting at Jack's place each night to plan and strategize. Lily coordinated with local business owners to install cameras and strengthen security. Jack reached out to neighboring communities, warning them about the Reapers and rallying their support. But the Reapers weren't backing down. Over the next few days, the gang's intimidation escalated. Windows were smashed, tires slashed, and threatening messages appeared scrawled in spray paint on walls and fences. Each act of vandalism felt like a blow, but Naomi refused to let it break their momentum. "It's fear," she told the group during one of their late-night meetings. "It's all they have left, and it's not enough to stop us." One night, Naomi received another ominous message on her phone. The text was brief, but chilling. "You think you're untouchable. We'll see about that." Naomi stared at the words, her chest tightening. She deleted the message and turned her phone off, but the unease lingered. That night, as she lay in bed, her thoughts kept drifting to the people who had already been hurt: Mac, Lily, Hank. She had taken on this fight willingly. But what if she was leading the town into more danger than they could handle? She closed her eyes, forcing herself to focus on the faces of those she had helped, the resilience she had seen in Hank's bruised smile, Lily's growing confidence, and the strength in Jack's quiet leadership. "Fear only worked if you let it," she reminded herself. The breaking point came 2 nights later. Naomi was working a late shift at the hospital when the emergency doors burst open. 2 paramedics wheeled in a stretcher, carrying a young man, barely in his 20s, his face bloody and bruised. Naomi rushed to their side, her pulse quickening when she recognized him as Eric, one of the newer employees at Jack's place. "What happened?" Naomi demanded, her hands already moving to assess his injuries. "Jumped by 3 guys, one of the paramedics said grimly. "Said they were part of the Reapers. Left him in an alley behind the diner." Naomi's jaw tightened, anger surging through her. She worked quickly, stitching a deep gash on Eric's forehead and stabilizing his injuries. He remained conscious, though dazed, and when he finally spoke, his words sent a chill down her spine. "They said, 'They're coming for you next,'" Eric murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Naomi froze, her hands stilling for a moment before she forced herself to continue working. The Reapers weren't just targeting the town anymore, they were targeting her. After Eric was stable, Naomi stepped outside to call Jack. He picked up on the first ring. "They're escalating," Naomi said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "They went after Eric and made it clear I'm their next target." Jack's voice was tight with worry. "You can't keep putting yourself in harm's way, Naomi. Let the police handle this." "The police can't stop them unless we have enough evidence," Naomi replied. "And even then, it'll take time. We can't just sit back and hope for the best." "What do you want to do?" Jack asked, his tone softening. Naomi took a deep breath, her mind racing. "We need to take control, get ahead of them. If they want to make this about me, fine. but we'll use it to show them they're not as powerful as they think. That night, Naomi called an emergency meeting at the diner. The usual group gathered, their faces drawn but determined. Hank was there, his arm still in a sling, and Lily sat beside him, her notebook open on the table. Naomi stood at the center, her voice calm but resolute as she addressed them. The Reapers want to make this personal. They think if they come after me, they can break us. But they're wrong. This isn't about me, it's about all of us. And we're going to show them that we're stronger together. Jack nodded, his expression firm. What's the plan? We hold our ground, Naomi said. No matter what they throw at us, we don't back down. And we document everything. Every attack, every threat. We build a case so strong they can't escape it. Lily raised her hand. What if they try something worse? Naomi met her gaze, her voice steady. Then we face it together. The group murmured their agreement, and for the first time that night, Naomi felt a flicker of hope. The Reapers might be escalating, but so was the town's resolve. As the meeting ended and the group began to disperse, Naomi lingered in the diner, watching as Jack locked the door and turned off the lights. Do you really think we can win this? Jack asked, his voice quiet. Naomi looked at him, her eyes filled with quiet determination. I don't think we can. I know we can. Because we're fighting for something they don't understand each other. Jack nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Guess that's why you're the one leading us. Naomi didn't respond, but as she stepped into the cool night air, she felt the weight of their trust settling on her shoulders. The fight ahead would be dangerous, but for the first time, she felt certain that Blue Rock would prevail. Together, they would face whatever came next. The air in Blue Rock felt charged, like the heavy stillness before a storm. The diner remained the heart of the town's quiet rebellion, but the tension was growing. Naomi sensed it every time she walked through the doors of Jack's place. People were nervous. The Reapers' attacks were becoming more targeted, more personal. The town's resolve had held strong, but the constant pressure was wearing on even the bravest among them. The morning after the emergency meeting, Naomi sat in the diner with Jack, Lily, and Hank. The room was unusually quiet, the usual chatter muted by unease. Jack poured her a fresh cup of coffee, his face lined with worry. They're not backing down, Jack said, setting the coffee pot aside. What if this is as far as we can push? Naomi stirred her coffee slowly, her thoughts turning to the community they had built. This is exactly when we need to push harder. If we give up now, we lose everything we've worked for. Hank, his arm still in a sling, leaned forward. I'm with you, Doc. Always. But we can't ignore what they're capable of. They're getting desperate. Naomi nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. Desperation is dangerous, but it's also a sign we're winning. They wouldn't be pushing this hard if they weren't afraid of losing their grip. That afternoon, Naomi returned to the hospital, determined to focus on her patients. But the tension in the air followed her, and by mid-shift, her worst fears were confirmed. A nurse hurried to her station, her face pale. Dr. Carter, you need to see this. Naomi followed the nurse to the ER entrance, where a police officer stood waiting. Officer Ryan, a younger member of the force, looked nervous as he handed Naomi a folded piece of paper. This was left on the steps outside, he said. Naomi unfolded the note, her heart sinking as she read the words. You can't save them all. Stop now, or they'll pay the price. Her grip tightened on the paper. It wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration of intent. They were done with vague warnings. Now they were promising direct harm. Did anyone see who left it? Naomi asked, her voice sharp. Ryan shook his head. No cameras at the entrance. It must have been quick. Naomi's chest tightened, but she forced herself to stay calm. Thanks for bringing this to me. Make sure the police log it. Ryan nodded, his expression grim. Be careful, Doc. They mean business. That night, Naomi called another emergency meeting at the diner. The regular group gathered, their faces drawn with concern. Naomi held the note in her hand, showing it to the group. "This is their next move," she said. "They're not just threatening us, they're threatening everyone we're trying to protect." Lily's face was pale as she looked at the note. "What do we do?" Naomi's gaze swept the room. "We keep going. We've already shown them we won't back down. Now we show them that their threats won't work either." Jack frowned. "But what if they make good on this? We've got families, kids, people who can't fight back." Naomi took a deep breath, her voice steady. "That's why we're doing this. So they don't have to live in fear anymore. If we stop now, we're letting them win. And I'm not willing to do that." The room fell silent as Naomi's words sank in. Slowly, the tension began to shift. Fear gave way to resolve, and one by one, they nodded. "We're with you," Hank said firmly. 2 nights later, the Reapers escalated again. Naomi was at Jack's place, reviewing security plans with Hank and Lily, when her phone buzzed with an incoming call from Officer Thompson. The urgency in his voice was unmistakable. "Naomi, you need to get to the community center. Now." "What's going on?" Naomi asked, already grabbing her bag. "They set it on fire," Thompson said, his voice tight. "It's bad." The community center was a cornerstone of Blue Rock. It hosted everything from town meetings to after-school programs, and its destruction was a direct attack on the town's spirit. By the time Naomi arrived, the flames were under control, but the damage was devastating. The roof had partially collapsed, and the interior was charred beyond recognition. Naomi stood with Thompson and Jack, staring at the smoldering remains. Around them, residents gathered, their faces etched with shock and anger. "They're trying to break us," Naomi said softly. "But this just proves how scared they are." "They're escalating," Thompson said. "We've got to stop this before someone gets killed." Naomi nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then we need to fight back. Harder." The next morning, Naomi called a meeting at the hospital. She gathered the group of townsfolk who had been leading the resistance, along with Officer Thompson and Dr. Patel. The room buzzed with tension as Naomi stood at the front, her presence commanding. "The fire was meant to scare us," she began, "to make us think this fight isn't worth it. But I need all of you to remember something: fear is their only weapon. And it only works if we let it." "What do you suggest?" Thompson asked. Naomi held up a list Lily had compiled, detailing every incident, every attack, every threat. "We've been building a case. We have witnesses, evidence, and now a public attack. It's time to go public." Jack frowned. "You mean press charges?" "I mean more than that," Naomi said. "We make it clear to the Reapers and the rest of the town that we're done playing defense. We take this to the media, to the police, to anyone who will listen. We show the world what they're doing here." The room fell silent as Naomi's words sank in. Slowly, Thompson nodded. "I'll work with the DA, see if we can expedite the process." "And we'll keep documenting," Lily said, her voice firm. "Make sure they can't wriggle out of this." Naomi looked around the room, her heart swelling with pride. "This is the breaking point. If we stand together now, we can end this." That evening, as Naomi prepared to leave the hospital, she received another message. This time, it wasn't a threat, it was a warning. "They're watching. Be careful." Naomi's chest tightened, but she refused to let fear take hold. The stakes were higher than ever, but so was their momentum. Blue Rock was on the verge of something transformative. The Reapers were crumbling, their powers slipping through their fingers. As Naomi stepped into the cool night air, she felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just a fight for safety, it was a fight for hope, for the soul of the town. And no matter what came next, she knew she wouldn't face it alone. The night felt heavy, as though the town itself was holding its breath. Naomi sat at her kitchen table, staring at Lily's notebook, now filled with evidence against the Reapers. The entries detailed every incident: the threats, the vandalism, the assaults, and now the fire at the community center. It was a grim catalog of fear, but it was also proof of something greater: resilience. Naomi glanced at her phone. Messages from Jack and Officer Thompson had come in throughout the evening, confirming that the district attorney was ready to act. But they needed one last push. A public, unified stand that would make it impossible for the Reapers to intimidate anyone again. Naomi closed the notebook and exhaled deeply. The fight had taken its toll, but they were close. She could feel it. Her phone buzzed again, a text from Jack. Colt and the Reapers are meeting at the old lumberyard tonight. Thompson's team is ready if we want to move. Naomi stood, grabbing her jacket. She sent a quick reply. I'll meet you there. The lumber yard was on the outskirts of town, a sprawling, shadowy lot filled with abandoned buildings and rusting equipment. When Naomi arrived, she found Jack, Hank, and Lily waiting near the perimeter. Officer Thompson stood with a group of deputies, their cars parked discreetly along the edge of the property. This is it, Jack said as Naomi approached. They're inside. Thompson says they've got most of their crew there tonight. Naomi nodded, her heart pounding. This is our chance to end it. Thompson joined them, his expression grim but determined. We've got enough evidence for arrests, but we need witnesses to make it stick. If we move in now, it'll be chaotic. Are you sure you want to be part of this? Naomi looked at the group around her: Jack's steady strength, Lily's quiet courage, Hank's unwavering loyalty. They had all risked so much already. We started this fight together, Naomi said. We finish it together. The group moved as one, keeping to the shadows as they approached the main building of the lumberyard. Inside, the Reapers were gathered around a makeshift table, their voices loud and angry. Colt stood at the center, his presence dominating the room. They think they can take us down, Colt was saying, his voice dripping with venom. That doctor, her little crew, they don't know who they're messing with. Naomi clenched her fists, but she forced herself to stay calm. This wasn't just about her, it was about the town. Thompson motioned to his deputies, signaling for them to move into position. Naomi and the others stayed back, watching as the police surrounded the building. Then, with a sharp motion from Thompson, the deputies stormed inside. The chaos was immediate. Colt's men scrambled as the police shouted commands, their flashlights cutting through the dimly lit space. Colt roared in defiance, trying to rally his crew, but the sudden show of force left them disoriented. Naomi, Jack, and Hank stayed near the entrance, ready to step in if needed. Lily clutched her phone, recording the scene for evidence. "Don't move!" a deputy barked as Colt tried to reach for the gun tucked in his waistband. Colt hesitated, his gaze darting around the room. For the first time, Naomi saw something she hadn't expected: fear. "Colt!" Naomi called, stepping into the light. Her voice was firm, carrying above the commotion. Colt turned, his eyes narrowing. "You," he snarled. "This is over," Naomi said, her tone steady. "You've lost," Colt sneered, but the fight had left his voice. "You think this changes anything? You think a few arrests will stop us?" Naomi stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "It's not just the arrests, Colt. It's the people you've terrorized, the ones who aren't afraid of you anymore. Your power was built on fear, and now it's gone." The deputies moved in, cuffing Colt and his remaining crew as Thompson read them their rights. The lumberyard fell silent, save for the sound of Colt's heavy breathing. As the police escorted him out, Colt shot Naomi a final glare. "You'll regret this," he spat. Naomi met his gaze, her voice calm. "The only thing I regret is not standing up to you sooner." The arrests sent shockwaves through Blue Rock. By morning, news of the bust had spread, and the diner was packed with people eager to hear the story firsthand. Jack worked behind the counter with renewed energy, while Hank and Lily recounted the events to a captivated audience. Naomi sat at her usual booth, sipping a cup of tea as the town came alive around her. The fear that had once gripped Blue Rock was gone, replaced by something stronger: hope. Officer Thompson entered the diner, a rare smile on his face. He slid into the seat across from Naomi, setting a file on the table. "We got them," he said. "The DA's confident this will stick. Colt and his crew won't be coming back." Naomi exhaled deeply, relief washing over her. "It's over." Thompson nodded. "Thanks to you." Naomi shook her head. "Thanks to all of us. This town did this together." In the weeks that followed, the town began to heal. The community center was rebuilt with the help of volunteers, and businesses that had been targeted reopened with new resolve. Naomi worked with Lily and Jack to establish a neighborhood watch program, ensuring the Reapers or anyone like them would never regain a foothold in Blue Rock. One evening, as Naomi walked to her car after another long shift, she found another note tucked under her windshield wiper. Her heart skipped a beat as she unfolded it, but this time, the message was different. "Thank you for standing up. You gave us our town back." Naomi smiled, tucking the note into her pocket. The fight had been hard, but it had been worth it. That night, Naomi returned to the diner, where Jack had replaced the old sign with a new one. Jack's Place, where community stands strong. The diner was full of familiar faces, people who had once been afraid, but now stood with pride. As Naomi sat down at her usual booth, Lily slid a fresh cup of tea in front of her. "You're a hero, you know," Lily said with a smile. Naomi shook her head, her gaze sweeping the room. "I'm just one person. The real heroes are all of us, standing together." Lily nodded, her smile widening. "Still, we wouldn't have done it without you." Naomi sipped her tea, letting the warmth fill her. The road to rebuilding wouldn't be easy, but Blue Rock had proven its strength. Fear no longer held the town captive, and the community had found its voice. As laughter and conversation filled the diner, Naomi allowed herself a rare moment of peace. The storm had passed, and Blue Rock was stronger for it. Together they had reclaimed their home and their hope. The crisp morning air carried the scent of freshly baked bread from the bakery down the street. Naomi Carter walked through Blue Rock's newly vibrant main square, a canvas tote slung over her shoulder. Around her, the town buzzed with life. Children rode bikes along the sidewalks, couples browsed the farmers' market, and shopkeepers opened their doors with smiles that hadn't been seen in years. It had been 6 months since the Reapers were arrested, and the transformation was undeniable. Where fear had once gripped the community, there was now a quiet confidence, a shared understanding that they had faced the worst together and emerged stronger. Naomi paused in front of a bulletin board outside the community center, which had been rebuilt brick by the town's residents. Flyers and notices covered it, advertising self-defense workshops, support groups, and a youth mentorship program run by Hank and Lily. A familiar voice called out behind her. "Admiring your handiwork?" Naomi turned to see Jack, his hands in his pockets and a sly grin on his face. "This is all of ours," Naomi said, gesturing to the vibrant scene around them. Jack nodded, his grin softening. "Still, none of this would have happened without you." Before Naomi could respond, Lily appeared, carrying a stack of flyers. Her once timid demeanor had given way to an energy that radiated confidence. "Naomi," Lily said, handing her a flyer, "we're starting a new workshop next week. Self-defense for teens. You should come." Naomi smiled. "I'll be there." The diner, now freshly painted and adorned with flower boxes, remained the town's beating heart. Naomi entered to the familiar hum of conversation and laughter. The Courage Wall, once a symbol of defiance, had grown into a testament of community strength. Pictures of volunteers rebuilding the community center hung alongside letters from neighboring towns inspired by Blue Rock's story. Ghosted in bold black letters across the top was the diner's unofficial motto, "Fear only wins if we let it." Naomi took her usual seat by the window, her tea arriving moments later, courtesy of Lily. "Busy morning?" Lily asked, setting the tea down. "Never a dull moment," Naomi replied. And it's good to see things staying busy here. People feel safe again, Lily said, her voice warm. It's because of what we built. Naomi nodded, her gaze drifting to the bustling street outside. A group of teenagers passed by on bikes, laughing loudly. One of them was Eric, the young man who had once been a victim of the Reapers. Now he seemed free, unburdened by the fear that had once held him down. Later that day, Naomi walked to the edge of town where a new sign had been erected. The bold letters read, "Welcome to Blue Rock, a united community." Naomi ran her fingers over the smooth wood, her heart swelling with pride. The town had become a symbol, not just for itself, but for others. Neighboring communities had started asking for advice on how to organize, to reclaim their sense of safety and belonging. Her phone buzzed with a message from Officer Thompson. "DA confirmed sentencing. Colt's crew is officially done." Naomi exhaled deeply, her shoulders relaxing as the weight of the last few months finally lifted. It's over. That night, Naomi returned to the diner, where Jack had replaced the old sign with a new one. Jack's Place, where community stands strong. The diner was full of familiar faces, people who had once been afraid, but now stood with pride. As Naomi sat down at her usual booth, Lily slid a fresh cup of tea in front of her. "You're a hero, you know," Lily said with a smile. Naomi shook her head, her gaze sweeping the room. "I'm just one person. The real heroes are all of us, standing together." Lily nodded, her smile widening. "Still, we wouldn't have done it without you." Naomi sipped her tea, letting the warmth fill her. The road to rebuilding wouldn't be easy, but Blue Rock had proven its strength. Fear no longer held the town captive, and the community had found its voice. As laughter and conversation filled the diner, Naomi allowed herself a rare moment of peace. The storm had passed, and Blue Rock was stronger for it. Together, they had reclaimed their home and their hope. Want to hear more inspiring stories like this one? Make sure to subscribe for updates and join us as we share tales of resilience, unity, and the power of standing together. If this story moved you, let us know where you're tuning in from. Your voice is part of the change.